Hello, my name is Juan Carlos Lopez. I'm a student from Campus Mazatlan, and today this is my exercise 10 that talks about the Cold War. We needed to talk about the Cold War, but here's a first of all a general description about it. The Cold War was a state of political and military tension after World War II between the powers in Western Bloc, that is the United States and NATO, that are the allies, and powers in the Eastern Bloc, that is the Soviet Union, and its allies on the Warsaw Pact. It was determined cold because there was not a large scale of fighting directly between sides, but it can be determined as a tension that they were always in problems or arguing or they didn't agree in something. Um, we needed to describe the most important dates of this or important things that happened. The first one in this Cold War is in 1948. That is the Berlin Airlift. That is where Germany was the pivot point of the conflict in Europe because it was like the main problem, you know. When the U.S. and the USSR failed to agree on a single Germany acceptable for both, they decided that to split in two sides. It was divided into West Berlin, that was surrounded by communists of the East Germany. Um, in 1950 to 1953, it was the Korean War. Korea represented a shift in the Cold War because the communists took over China in 1949. The Soviets detonated their atomic bomb, and then you had this conflict in Korea between North and South. Kim Sung in the North forced the civil war in 1950, and the U.S. responded by going to the UN. When the Soviets walked out, passing on the chance to veto a military response, the U.S. and its allies intervened. So there was a lot of trouble about that, and there was a big conflict. You know, in 1956, it was the Soviet invasion of Hungary. Hungary marked the failure of the U.S. attempts to liberate Eastern Europe by encouraging the overthrow of communist governments. But the Soviet use of force led to an erosion of its status and raised questions about whether they could continue their economic and military influence over the Warsaw Pact countries. In 1962, the Cuban missile crisis, that it was when the Cold War had now spread it to America's backyard. The escalation of the U.S. attempts to check the communist regime in Cuba made a lot of tension, you know, again, with the failure of Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 led to a further acceleration of tensions and the Soviets' plan on putting nuclear weapons in Cuba. This raised the prospect of an atomic war, but both sides were backed away. The thing is, it was that Cuba wasn't an ally of the U.S., so they had a lot of missiles. As you can see in this picture, it was like a center, so they can send bombs to almost everywhere without having any problem. You know, it was close to everything that could affect the United States or America. You know, the space race was another in 1955 to 72. Landmarks in the 57, the U.S. was shaken when the Soviet put Sputnik into orbit. The perception that this was like the perception they had, it was that they were competing. You know, they put a space home, like a place where astronauts can live in space, Um, um, Sorry, I was just thinking. So the USA had already the first man on the moon, and then the Soviets did this. So there was like always like competing. They wanted to be better. They wanted to outstand. So there was a lot of trouble about this. Like it's like if I buy a toy and my best friend buys the same toy but better. Like always, is gonna be that problem. And the last date that I consider is 89, 1989. That is when the fall of Berlin Wall. That the Soviets couldn't not sustain themselves economically. So after four decades, the Cold War was decided was not by military showdown, but the inability of the Soviet Union and their allies to provide for basic needs for the citizens. So the Soviets couldn't pay for their part. They couldn't help them in anything because they were ending their money in wars and many different stuff. So at the end, the people got tired, and everybody got tired, and the wall was thrown away. Like there was not more two Germanys. So it's a really important date for my point of view. Like it's when they became together again. Um, there's two types of economic systems on those dates. That it was the capitalism and the socialisms. The capitalism is an economic system in which trade industry, and that means like the production are privately owned and operate via profit and loss calculation through the price system. Central characteristic of capitalism include private property, capital accumulation, wage labor, and in some situations, fully competitive markets. So like the capitalism lets you do almost everything like for you. You can work for you and make the money you want, but always for you. You will have the worst job you can have. There's always gonna be that salary. The less salary you can get, the minimum wage that is really good. So it's really really nice. The other one is socialism. Socialism is a social and economic system and is characterized by a social ownership and social control of the means of production and cooperative management of the economy, as well as a political theory and movement that aims at the establishment of such system. It refers like social or ownership, they may refer to cooperative enterprises, common ownership, state ownership, citizen ownership. So practically they own everything. Like the leader, it's on the top, and everybody works for them. Like they have it. Um, we needed to interview someone that could help you about this, and I decided to interview my father because he loves history, so he knows a lot about this. So here's the interview with his answers. The first question was, what countries were the world leaders during the period? He didn't answer me with the leaders, but he knew the names. So Mussolini, Hitler, Roosevelt, Stalin, like all the world leaders were there, like involved. Um, the other question was, why did countries who were allies during the wars become enemies afterwards? I guess they were referring to Germany and the Soviet Union, and he answered because they had many disagreements and Germany lost the Second World War, so they didn't have much power. In other words, they were useless for Soviet Union. So, and they started taking control over them. The third question was, where did the Cold War take place? It took place around all the world, like from the parallel in Korea to the jungles in Vietnam to the skies over the Soviet Union, in Germany, everywhere. Um, Another question was, what opinion did the general public have from the Cold War? Um, he answered, it was a good to both be alerted about the enemies. Having this tension helped it so none of them will do something bad against another nation. Like like they say, have your own enemy closer and your friends farther. The last section was, what type of weapons did the two world powers have at their disposal? They mainly have like everything you can imagine, like from guns to powerful nuclear bombs of massive destruction. So it was like really bad. At the end, like my conclusion is that the Cold War was a really peaceful war, but there was a lot of mess. Like they were putting their noses on everything. They were controlling over other people, and in my personal opinion, I don't agree that the governments can have this type of power over someone because we were born to be free. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.